Hello, peoples. Second last session of Recap 2021. I'm happy to introduce David Kunz to you, who also already participated in the first recap session or recap conference, already putting the bar high up there in terms of live coding. So I will not refrain him from doing anything and just hand over control. David, knock him out.
Thank you very much. I hope you can see my screen.
Yep, all looking good.
Perfect. So I have one introduction slide, and then I go back to live coding. So my designer, she wants me to add a field to a bookshop application, which you see here, which you hopefully all know. And this field is called supplier. And the twist to it is that I have to build a value help where data is populated by SAP S/4HANA. So the data sits in S/4HANA and I have to retrieve it. And the other task she gives me is to add the supplier and the supplier name in my list of books. So how can we do that? Let's dive in. So the first thing we do is go to API Business Hub and go to S/4HANA Cloud and search for the API to actually retrieve the data, which is called Business Partner. And here's a no data API. I can inspect it and download the details in EDMX format. I've already done that. And in my bookshop application, I can just import this. Now it created a season file, which I can use in my CAP model, and I can use all the CAP features for it. And it created an entry in my package.json file. So here in my CDS file, I'm just going to use this API. So I'm going to import API Business Partner from the season file and call it S4. Now I want to create an entity, which is called suppliers, as a projection on S4A _ business partner. And since this entity is super big, I'm only interested in two fields, the ID and the name. So I just write key business partner, and I want to call it ID, and business partner full name as name. And now I want to enhance my entity books with this suppliers reference. So I add a supplier field, and I just create an association to suppliers. Now, keep in mind that since this is a projection to an external entity, no database artifact will be created. Here, however, we create a foreign key referencing this supplier. Now, since I also want to have a value help for the suppliers entity, I go into my admin service.cds file, and I just create this entity suppliers as a projection on my suppliers. I also want to have a value help, so I just write CDS or data value list. And this provides me some nice annotations to get a value help out of it. Now, some of the UI annotations I've already prepared, for example, the line item annotation and the field group to show it on the object page. So the UI should be ready to go. Now, I told you that this entity doesn't have any database artifact. Now, when a request comes to our external suppliers entity, we have to get data somehow, right? So what we can do here and what we should do here is delegate all the requests coming to our own server to this S/4HANA API. So for this, we have to write a little bit of custom coding. So I go into my admin service.js file, and I can just, before I start, connect to all the services I need. For example, my DB service, as well as my S/4HANA service. And this is called API Business Partner. Now that I have these services, I can create a custom handler to my own service. I can write this on. And whenever there's a read request to my suppliers entity, I want to delegate the request to my S/4HANA entity. And the only thing I need to do is S4 run reg.query. And that's it. One line of code. Now, I want to test it because usually I make mistakes. And the thing is, I don't have time to configure the whole S/4HANA system. I want to quickly iterate. I want to grow as I go. and I want to mock everything. We have all the metadata imported already, so we can actually mock it. I can also create some test data. I have prepared that already. I think I have it here. Let me create another terminal. And now I don't find my data anymore. Okay, it's here. So I create a service and service external data. Sorry, and now I CP all the data here. Okay. Okay, so now I have a _business partner CSV, and I have data, and now I can run my service by just writing CDS watch. And if I go to this web page, I can open my UI, manage books. And now we can see my list. None of them have a supplier. I click on edit. And now I can add a supplier. And now you can see the data from my mocked S/4HANA system. I can select one and save it. And now it's saved in the database. So part one of my task was very easy. So now I have this value help. Part two will be a little bit harder because I have to create the supplier name and information about the supplier name in all entries of that list. And it would be quite tedious to call to S/4HANA for each of these list items. So the solution to this problem is to replicate the data. Okay. So what I can do, I can go back to my schema CDS, and since I don't have any database artifact here, I can use the annotation CDS persistence table, and this will force the compiler to create a database table for this projection by just taking the fields, ID and name. So now I have a persistency. Now the only thing left to do is to fill the persistency. So I go back to my admin service.js, and I say this after create and update of my books. So whenever the books are created or updated, I want to see if I've already replicated the data for a supplier if some is filled. And if not, I will call for S/4HANA to retrieve the data and plug it into my own database. So first I want to see if I have a supplier underscore ID, which I call ID. And if I have an ID, I get my database entity, which is called suppliers. So if I have an ID, I want to see if I've already replicated this supplier. And I can use the dbExist function for my suppliers with that ID. And if it's not yet replicated, then I want to call to S/4HANA to retrieve the information about that supplier. So I take my S4 service and read my suppliers, and you can see I can use the same suppliers entity one time for my local database, one time for S/4HANA. And if I found a supplier, I can just insert my supplier into my suppliers. And that's it. Now,
David, you have a typo in line 9, entities.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So that's pair programming. I like it. So now we have replicated the data once we create or update a book. Now, the big problem is when you replicate data is you have to keep it up to date. So if the data changes in your source system, then you have to make sure that it's updated. And to solve that problem, we will use events. So in our API hub, we can also see events now. This is a new feature. And we can search for business partners. And there are events. And there's one event which is particularly interesting. It's the business partner changed event. Okay, so let's go back and implement the listening to events. So I go back to my schema CDS, and you've seen how I imported synchronous APIs into my CAP service. Unfortunately, the same is not yet there for asynchronous APIs, aka events. So I have to tweak it. So I just write extend service S4 with event, and I call it business partner changed, for example. And the payload is business partner, and it has the same type as S4 A underscore business partner. And this type, which I stole from API Business Hub, has to be inserted here. With or without the slash, doesn't matter. So we know which events to listen to. Okay, now that I've extended my service, I have to teach my mock S4HANA system to actually emit events whenever I change something. So I create a file in my external folder, which has the same name as the model, API business partner.js. And here I just emit my message whenever something changes. So I just pasted some snippet here. So whenever there's a create or an update on this A business partner entity, I want to emit the event business partner changed. Okay, now my mock server emits events. Now, if something is emitted, I also have to receive it. So I go back to my admin service.js, and now I want to listen to events. And that's also super simple. I just write S4 on business partner changed. And this time I get not a request, but a message, which is extremely similar to a request. And you can use the same API you're used to on the message. And here I can also plug in some snippets because you have seen basically the same thing before. So again, I see if the supplier exists, and the supplier ID I retrieve from my payload. And if I have replicated it, then I read the supplier from my S4HANA system. And if I found a supplier, I update my suppliers with that supplier. And that's all you have to do. So let's, CDS Watch is restarting the whole thing all the time. So let's see if that worked. So I go to my Managed Books application again. And I see the list. I provide a supplier for one of those, for example, Acme. And now if I hit save, the supplier data will be replicated. So if I go back to my Managed Books, I forgot to, in my UI, also include the supplier name. So let's do that again. Again, we have to provide a supplier here. And you can see that not only do we have the ID, but also the supplier name, because we replicated the data and it's super fast. Now, running everything in one process is easy, right? Now we want to run it in two processes. So one thing to do to achieve this is to use file-based messaging for this messaging part. So I create a pragma, which I prepared already, which is called local hybrid. And in this local hybrid, not pragma, profile. And in this local hybrid profile, I switch kind to file-based messaging. Now that allows me to use a file-based message broker to exchange messages in between. I want to run in one process only this API business partner, and in the other process only my app, and not both in the same process. So I can use the CDS mock function, API business partner, so the service I want to mock, with a -- profile local hybrid. This is also a new feature. And here I want to use CDS Watch with profile local hybrid. So this server only serves business partner. This server serves the rest. Now I can do the same game as before. I can select some supplier. And now this list is being retrieved by this other process through HTTP requests. I can save it. Now the data is replicated from one process to the other, so to say. I click on go and I see the replicated data. Now let me fire some patch request to this process. And now I have to check which port it's running on. So I send a patch request to 64802 to change my A business partner. So that will trigger an event. And then my event should be received by this other application. Now, if I hit go again, you can see a locally changed company making everything. So this patch request changed the A business partner entity. Then I received the message through the file broker. I called back, retrieved the updated data, and updated my local persistency, and everything works. And again, all of this would be quite pointless if we couldn't do this with a real S/4HANA system. So that was our main task. So let's just stop mocking anything. And now I want to connect to this real S/4HANA system. I go into my package.json and I prepared all those credentials configuration. In the future, it will be a lot easier with the CDS bind command where you can fill in the credentials automatically and you don't have to steal it using service keys manually. So I can just use my profile hybrid, which uses enterprise messaging shared, as well as the real S/4HANA API. And now I can do the same thing. So I can select the supplier. And now it's a bit slower because it retrieves the data from S/4HANA. And I can even use filtering here. So I search for Acme. So this is data coming from S/4HANA. I click on save. The data is replicated. And in my books, I can see the replicated data. An S/4HANA company making everything. Now, what happens if I change something in S/4HANA? So I'm here in S/4HANA, and I have here the business partner Acme, and I want to change the name to a changed S/4HANA company. Now I click on save, and now if I hit refresh again, you can see a changed S/4HANA company making everything. It's a little bit like magic. And under the hood, quite a lot of things happen. A queue is created on the event mesh instance, listening to the events from S/4HANA. And then S/4HANA sends, and S/4HANA has to be configured to send events when a business partner has changed. It lands in the queue puts it into the local system running on my computer, and I can update my entries. So that is my demo. Now I go back to my slides, because there have been quite a lot of features which I've shown. And sometimes it looks very innocent, like this line here, where I take the original request and delegate it to S/4HANA. Doesn't seem like much, but actually a lot of stuff is happening underneath, because we have a transformer which takes a CQN, or a query object, which is this query here, and converts it to an OData request. And we're heavily working on many new features. For example, also the distinction between OData v2 and OData v4 services. So we will support $expand, $count, and filter with type prefixes, for example, the UUID type, and in case of OData v4, also the $search operator. You have seen view resolving, if you remember the handler for the business partner changed events, where we checked if the supplier with that ID exists on our database table, and where we also read to S/4HANA. And you could see we used the same supplier's entity. And this is done using, let's say, smart view resolving, which we do under the hood, where we detect what you want to do and go to the right thing. The supplier could be a local replica. It could be the real S/4HANA instance, or in case of mock mode, it could be the mock data in your own database. I also showed you CDS persistence table, which is the only thing you need to do to create a database artifact out of nothing, so to say. And that allows you to easily replicate data. I've shown you declared events. which hopefully will be made possible to be imported too. So you can extend your service or define a service with an event definition inside, and now you have all the metadata about this event in your model, and that will help us, especially in the future, tremendously. And maybe in the future, we will also allow you to have, let's say, the common eventing operations out of the box without writing a single line of code. And you can specify the type which you got from your API hub, for example. Under the hood, regarding eventing, we are compatible to the cloud event specification, which is a specification which is done outside of SAP, but what SAP adheres to. And it has kind of this format with a type and a source. And we're just compliant. You don't have to do anything. It works out of the box. So a lot of stuff you don't even have to think of. Same thing goes for topic enhancement. If you remember, you just wrote this line here, business partner changed. Then we looked up the definition in our model and saw that it has this type, which we stole. It's basically this last part here, but this is not the topic. The topic is a bit more complicated. S/4HANA mixes also the system information in the part here, and and things like that. So we make sure that you don't have to deal with it, that it just works, right? And we use internally pattern matching to match for any source, and that's a lot easier for you to do. I introduced a new command or a new flag, which is the profile flag. So if you defined profiles in your package.json file, you can now use cds-profile and provide the profile. So you don't have to set node env for cds-env anymore. A lot easier. In the code I showed you, you could see a lot of db exists s4 read insert supplier. And you might be wondering why I never write srvt exrec, because that's supposed to be the thing you have to write all the time to propagate user information and so on. The reason is we use continuation local storage, which is a relatively new feature, or it's based on async hooks on Node.js, which is relatively new. And it allows you to have a local storage for your continuation. A continuation is something like function 1 calls function 2, and it can be an async call or a synchronous call. And you can create these local storages, which all those called functions have access to. It's quite neat and reduces a lot of boilerplate without you even knowing. And then there's this new command, cds-bind. I told you before that in the future, you will not have to deal with credentials and manually retrieving the credentials through manually creating service keys or stealing them from a deployed app or anything. We will provide a command, cds-bind, where you can just say, okay, I want to bind the messaging service to my event mesh instance, and you're done. You know, no more fiddling around with JSON or anything. So it will create service keys, load it somehow in your local credential store so that your local CAP app has access to. So this is the end. I thank you very much, and the best run with CAP.
Thanks a lot, David. Again, very, very impressive. Really great feedback also in the chat to your talk. So very, very well done. There are a couple of questions. We cannot cover all of them. So maybe you can also look at the question tool, as I said, in the evening session. We send the links on a regular basis in the chat to all of you. Maybe we can cover one or two, David, real quick. The first one was raised by Gregor. What do I need to add to my console to get this command preview?
This command preview, that's the fish share. So maybe I can make a little bit advertisement. It works out of the box. You can just use this shell here. It's a command line shell for the 90s.
Screen, I think.
I have to share again. So you go to fishshell.com and you get a nice command line shell for the 90s. And it has auto suggestions, nice colors, code completion. It's awesome. It's really great. Best shell ever.
Okay, then maybe one more by Niklas. Is DB exists also recommended if we were in the transaction context of a request?
Yes.
Or is there a similar function for the transaction?
No, because as I said, we have this continuation local storage. You never need to do srvt exrec anymore. Just do the local stuff, and the user will be propagated, and the transaction will be reused, and and things like that, because we store the transaction in this local storage, and successive commands to the database use the same transaction. So just use this.
All right. And maybe one very last one, and then we stop. Is there a list of limitations when redirecting the request to an OData v2 API like the one of the business partner API?
Yes, there are limitations. Not all features work. And as I said, we're working on some newer features like expand, for example, and search. So some things don't work. I don't know if there is a list available which of the things which work or which don't work. I would need to check.
All right. Then we leave it here. There are a couple of more, but we can cover them later on, I guess.
All right.
Thanks a lot, David.
Yeah,
Thanks a lot.